Isn't that amazing how some of that stuff flips? Every power rankings I see right now, and I get it, Vikings are 4-0. They're playing at a high level. They've had 3 straight really impressive wins, taking nothing away from the Giants in week 1.
Sure.
But the 49ers and then the Texans and then the Packers at Lambeau Field.
Totally.
Like, that's a run. But we've spent 2 years talking about the Lions. And we've talked about the Packers since the middle of last season. And all of a sudden, that quickly, it flips to the Vikings are the team that's trying to stay on top, a team that nobody talked about. And I'll tell you this, they'll never say this, but the Vikings loved that this offseason. They loved
that nobody was talking about.
Everybody was talking about, man, the Lions were on the doorstep, almost went to the Super Bowl. The Packers are on the doorstep. Remember, the Packers, much like the Lions, also were like a bounce or two, a play or two away from beating the 49ers in San Francisco in the playoffs last year.
Love had his arguably worst throw of the season to end that game last year.
Correct. Cross the body, no need to do it.
Yeah, full Brett Favre, watch me do this. Oh, no, it's picked.
Right. But the Packers were another team who, and again, you hold your breath when it's week 1 and Love goes down in a heap. It ends up being an MCL sprain and he's back. But, the other sexy team wasn't the Vikings. It was the Bears.
Right.
All we talked about was Caleb Williams and the Bears. And listen, it's 4 games in. We got a long way to go in terms of the schedule here. And Caleb was always going to be a process because he didn't play that much in rhythm. He didn't play that much in the pocket at Oklahoma or at USC. So there was going to be a growth process that needed to happen. And you're seeing them make some adjustments here. They're trying to figure things out in terms of just how they're using all those pieces. Like every time I watch a Bears game, I'm like, is DeAndre Swift still on the team? Like, I'm pretty sure he is. I think he scored a touchdown last week, but there's so many times where it's the other backs who are getting the ball. They're trying to figure out what their identity is, and they're also working through it with a player who had so much focus on him, which happens when you go around showing people the background on your phone says, I'm going to win 8 Super Bowls. I mean, you're setting the bar extraordinarily high. And, I actually asked Tom Brady about that because that's all, Tom won 7 and it was, hey, I'm going to be the greatest ever. I want to be the number 1 pick. I want to win 8 Super Bowls. And I asked Tom Brady when he came on the Insiders on NFL Network, I think it was a couple of months ago,
Name drop.
Do you like that? Like, do you like the sheer chutzpah to come out and say, like, yeah, I want to win 8 Super Bowls? Or do you think, like, these dudes have no idea how hard it is to win 1? And what he said was, everybody's got different ways to motivate themselves. It was a very, Tom was playing it cool on that one. I'm sure he had some other thoughts about it. But basically he said, like, everybody's got different ways to motivate themselves. Well, all of a sudden now you watch the Bears, particularly the dichotomy compared to the Commanders and what they're doing with Jaden Daniels right now. And I don't blame people for going like, oh, man, is this last year again? Is this C.J. Stroud, where you had a pretty good idea, even though the Panthers and Bryce Young beat the Texans and C.J. Stroud in the early portion of the season last year. Yeah. Is this another situation where the number 2 pick is better than the number 1 pick? I think that the core difference here is you are seeing flashes of Caleb Williams. When you watch, it's not consistent right now, but when he gets out the pocket, when he's rolling to his left on a play that was, I think it was 2 weeks ago, and he contorts his body and throws it like a shortstop across his body and throws a dime 20 yards downfield, you're like, that's the guy.
Right.
That's what's in there. It's all the other stuff. It was a lot of scouts and coaches I talked to even before the draft were like, part of it with him is just you can't play hero ball all the time. Yeah. You don't need to make the amazing play, just sometimes. And he had to do that at USC last year because his offensive line was terrible.
And the defense was
bad,
yeah.
And the receivers weren't very good. Yeah. So he had to try to do some of those things. In Chicago, he's got a defense. He has weapons around him. And there are times where, based on Matt Eberflus and now what his mentality is, you probably want the quarterback to be a little bit more conservative. Whereas Washington, with Cliff Kingsbury as the OC, is like, we're gonna outrace people. We don't mind being in a shootout, even though Dan Quinn's a defensive guy. Let's cut this guy loose. And Jaden Daniels has been awesome. That's the other thing. It's not as if, in other words, I don't think that Caleb Williams looks as out of place as Bryce Young did a year ago. And I'm still, we had Bill O'Brien on yesterday, who's now the BC head coach. He was one of the OCs for Bryce Young at Alabama, who said, he delivered it very strongly, like, absolutely, this guy can still be a really good player in terms of Bryce Young because he needs the right support system. It's got to be the right coaches and all that stuff. And I believe that too, just because his wiring is the right way, his love of the game, his processing ability. But you don't see it, man. You didn't see it. And that's how the guy gets benched after 3 different play callers over the first 19 games of his career, 2 games into his second season as the number 1 overall pick, who you gave up all sorts of resources to go and get. With Caleb, you at least see that it's in there. Now it's a matter of how do you bring him along? He's going to have the pressure on him. If you can find a way to win games 18-15 or whatever, that's not necessarily the worst thing. But it is going to be a situation where, because of the expectations, he's got to play better over the course of time. Right now, if you're stacking up the NFC North, I mean, I think as much as all through the offseason, I said it repeatedly on this show, like you just objectively would stack the Vikings 4th out of 4. Now, that's kind of flipped. I think that the Bears, objectively, based on what you've seen so far, you probably put in the number 4 slot. At the same time, you talk to coaches who go up against the Bears, and they'll tell you how hard it is to play against Matt Eberflus. And that defense, they're still really talented on that side. And when you got a player with the rare playmaking ability at the quarterback position, like Caleb Williams, it's still dangerous. It doesn't look great. It's not consistent, and it's not what Jaden Daniels is doing. But I don't get the same types of vibes off that situation right now. And by the way, the Lions are still really good. You know, a lot of it's going to come down to you get into the playoffs, you get into outdoor games, which has been an issue for Jared Goff over the years, even though, you know, he played well at times when they were playing outdoors at the Coliseum early on in his career with the Rams. But, you know, in some of those situations. But those guys on the fast track at Ford Field, playing indoors, what Ben Johnson is scheming up for them, that's still, I understand the power rankings. The Vikings have been really impressive. I was at the Week 3 game against the Texans. I mean, they're playing really, really well. I still, just based on the consistency with which the Lions have done it, that team still scares me every single week going up against those guys. I also think that there's still upside on all those young players that they've got on the offense. I mean, Goff's the one distributing the football and has completely, you know, remade his career in Detroit. But, like, we haven't seen a Jahmyr Gibbs takeover game yet. We really haven't seen, I don't think, an Amon-Ra St. Brown.
We haven't seen Samuel Porter really do anything.
Right. Jamison Williams has been like the breakout star, and rightly so. That was one that I think everybody was sleeping on. That was one of the guys when I talked to Dan Campbell, I talked to some of the other coaches while they were at camp. Everyone was just like, J-Mo, like, this is now the time. His first year is totally messed up because he was coming off the ACL. He was never himself. Second year, he gets the gambling suspension. Yep. You saw flashes of it. I was at a game in New Orleans. It was like last November, December. And J-Mo had a big play in that one. And you're like, oh, yeah. Remember when that guy was the best player in college football?
Right.
It wasn't all that close. He gets hurt in was it the national championship game or the semifinal?
Right.
It was in the playoff.
He got hurt in the playoff.
It was a significant injury, and that just slowed him down. But, like, the Lions still traded up and took him because he's the best playmaker in that entire draft. Now, year 3, finally, no suspensions, no injuries. There's a lot of upside on that Lions team. Like everything else, it's who you play when you play them. It's about injuries and all that. They're a pretty healthy football team overall right now.
And what I like, too, about them is Ben Johnson not afraid to just play smash mouth like that we saw in week 1 in overtime. It was just David Montgomery down your throat, try and stop it. Even though they have all these pass-catching weapons and Goff is slinging it, not afraid to just line up and, boom, we're going to run it down your throat.
Yeah, I was saying that to Rich, this offseason. We were talking about what players could step up, and he was high on Jahmyr Gibbs, as all of us were, but I had to remind him, bro, David Montgomery, they're not just not going to use this guy. Like you said, he's like a wrecking machine.
Not afraid to do it. He's like that kind of like weapon in your back pocket of like, oh, no, we can play this way if we need to, which have we seen the Packers unable to do in the playoffs. When it gets cold, you need to be able to run the ball, and they have that ability.
And the David Montgomery, how he got to Detroit is still so fascinating to me because
in division, the Bears just gave him up.
But the Lions were trying to re-sign Jamal Williams. Jamal Williams turned down a deal, wanted more money from Detroit. The Lions were like, okay, and they pivoted, and they went and got a guy they thought was a better player, and I think that's borne itself out. Mm-hmm. With David Montgomery, they paid him a little bit more. Jamal Williams ends up taking a lot less money in New Orleans. Basically, it was like a negotiation, and it was, hey, we're done. This is the best offer. But they would have re-signed Jamal Williams if he took the deal. Instead, they end up with David Montgomery, who's been one of the biggest tone setters on one of the best teams in the NFL. And as for Ben Johnson, real quick before we go to break, I was reminded by somebody, that game against Seattle on Monday night, not only is he facing Mike McDonald, who got the head coaching job that Ben Johnson also interviewed for. And Ben was very much in the mix for that job. He interviewed. They liked him. He wasn't really in a headspace to take a job this past year. But Mike McDonald also, remember, shut down Ben Johnson and the Lions last year when he was the Ravens defensive coordinator. That game, watching it, and listen, the players got to go make plays, but when they bust out Alcatraz, a play that's been in the playbook for years, they never used the reverse pass, throw it to Jared Goff play. That one feels like it's a little extra. That one feels like I'm gonna use this one right now.
Extra sprinkles.
I'm gonna remind you why I'm gonna be one of the top head coaching candidates.
Yeah. Catch the Rich Eisen Show every single day on the Roku Channel, 12 to 3 Eastern, for free.